This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Nick Larkey! Stevenson with his own move. Carrington. North are in front!
Hello and welcome back to North Pod. It is still February now. We're at least in the second month of the year. I don't think it's completely crazy to be talking football in February because there's practice matches and we're, sort of on the doorstep of the season now. But still very much pre-season mode. This episode, we're going to have a look at the forward line, do a bit of a season preview for that area of the ground, which should be interesting, a bit of a stream of consciousness from me, so hopefully I can keep it pretty coherent. It'll just follow the same format as the defensive preview if you listened to that episode a couple of weeks ago. Hopefully you enjoyed the collaboration with Josh and Dean over from the other North Melbourne podcasts. It was great to chat with them and sort of get some different opinions on how we're feeling about the season. So, back to normal programming, just me this week. So if you've tuned in for Josh or Dean, sorry, it's just me. But hopefully still some coherent things to say in this episode. Before I jump in, just a couple of housekeeping things. I got a couple of people to shout out. So thank you to Onerous Boxer 13124 for buying me a coffee, and also Luke Toomey. I'm pretty sure it's Toomey. So sorry if it's not. It's spelt Twomey, but I'm going to guess it's Toomey. So thank you so much to those two loyal listeners for contributing. And if you'd like to get a shout out, you can head over to my Buy Me a Coffee. It's in my link dump and in the show notes to support the show. I would really appreciate it. And I've also got a couple of Apple reviews, two that have come through in the last sort of week and a half or so. So one from Tomahawk One, thank you for the 5-star review, and also one from Mike_is_my_name. Thank you for the 5-star review. I really appreciate it. I think Tomo's review talked about being sort of fair and unbiased, and trying not to have the blue and white goggles on too much, and I appreciate that, Tom. It's kind of what I go for. I think I like to at least think of myself as a bit of a realist and grounded in reality, which, sometimes sports fans aren't, and I certainly toe that line from time to time, but I do hope and I aim for this podcast to be pretty unbiased, even if it is obviously catering to us North fans. So thank you to those people. Please leave me a review or buy me a coffee / vanilla Coke. I really appreciate any support for the show. And as always, you can find me on all social media at Northpod Show. Let's jump right in. As I said, same format as the defensive preview. So I'm just going to read through, I guess, a list of players that I think will or could play in the forward line this year. And then we'll go through kind of where I see them. So Hugh Greenwood, Jaden Stevenson, Harry Sheasel, Curtis Taylor, Zane Dersma, Jai Simpkin, Darcy Tucker, who's really popped up in the match sim, and we'll talk about that. Zach Fisher, Nick Larkey, Cal Coleman-Jones, Tom Powell, Paul Curtis, Taron Thomas, Charlie Comben, Braden George, Cooper Harvey, Finbar Maley, Eddie Ford, Blake Drury, Cam Zerha and Robert Hansen Jr. They are the ones that I've said can, will, or should play forward. Obviously, a couple of those are probably more fringe, like Powell's certainly a fringe forward line player, and I will talk about him. Comben we know is going to start back. So, I know there's a few in there that probably aren't going to play forward, but I think they could. So, in terms of who is an absolute lock, go figure, Nick Larkey. I think he's probably first picked, and if not, he's one of the first couple that are picked every week. Number one key forward, coming off 70 goals. I think just in terms of his year, I sort of hope, and I talked about it in my plus minus episode, I do hope that he kicks less goals this year and it just comes from a place of there's other people kicking the goals instead. So, I'd certainly love him to still kick a few bags, and if he ended up with 60, but we're scoring more because there's a bit more of a spread, I think that'd be great. We've just got to keep kicking it to his advantage, playing to his advantage. He needs it out in the lead or one out. He needs fast ball movement, which I think it looks like based on how our preseason's going. We certainly look to be trying to play a fast ball movement kind of game, and I think that will really benefit Nick because he needs those one-on-one opportunities and to be hit on the lead. So hopefully we can provide him with that this year, and we can kick it to him that way rather than kicking it on his head when he's going to get third man upped and outmarked in those pack situations. That's not his strength. Just more of the same from him in general. He had a fantastic year last year, and hopefully we've got plenty more years of him playing that kingpin role up forward. I think Zerha I've got next as a lock, and he had a bit of an up and down year last year. He was a bit out of form at times, and he did have a couple of injuries. He didn't finish off the year, went in for surgery early. Looks to have had a pretty transformative preseason. In terms of his body shape, he seems to have really shredded down and lost a few kegs. Not that we're allowed to talk about player weights anymore, but he certainly looks slimmer and potentially more mobile than he has in previous years, or at least in the last couple of years. So, we really need him to bring it this year. I think, like the last couple of years, it'd be good to see him sort of in bursts through the middle. We know that fitness has not been a strength of his, but I think if we can just get a couple of centre bounce attendances per game out of him, he just gives us a different look in that midfield. He's a real bull, might be where his name's come from, he just brings something different that I think is a bit less predictable to opposition midfield. So I do think it's probably unrealistic that he's going to become a Jordan De Goey type that's kind of 50-50. There's just so many, or a Dustin Martin, those players that are equal part forward and midfielder. I think he is more of a forward than a midfielder, but there's certainly some midfield roles that he can play. And I would like to see him kind of go back to that, almost goal-hungry state that he's had in the past, but just be a bit more clinical with his finishing. I think where he gets himself into trouble is when he's a bit indecisive, and I think that's when his poor decision-making and inaccuracy in front of goal has kind of come from. So I'd like him to just play off instinct. I think that's when he plays best, and hopefully we can see more games from him like that second half he played against Essendon last year. It was, he kept us in the game single-handedly. So we know that he can kind of play second tall if required. I don't think that's his best role. I think he's better off as the third tall, in that he's really a more medium marking kind of player. But, depending on how our other tall forward stocks are looking, I think you can play him as a second tall. And I'll probably talk more about that a little bit later in the pod. Harry Sheezel is an interesting one. I think I'm ready for him to be a bit of a Mr. Fix-It, in that I'd like to see him forward of the ball if we're playing well and the ball's getting down there. But I think I'd prefer to see him in defence or in the middle if things aren't going so well. I just think we need him to be where the ball is. And so if we're getting pummeled, let's put him off half back or chuck him in the middle. But, if it's a pretty 50-50 game or we're playing well, I think, he has some forward craft that's pretty hard to coach. He's a great decision maker. He's got those silky skills. So I would love to see a bit more of him in that half forward line this year. I don't want him parked there forever, because I do think there'll be games where it's just really hard to get much impact from him. But I think it's time to start seeing what he can show elsewhere. He wasn't super impactful in the middle in that first match sim. I think he found it a bit difficult to get involved in the game, but I think that's what we need to work towards. And if that means that he has a less impactful season this year than last year, but he's getting opportunities in different areas of the ground, then I think ultimately that's a net win for us. The fact that he was able to win the Sid Barker in his first season, absolutely remarkable. But I think I'd like to see him forward maybe a quarter of the time, just in terms of the year, and then maybe 50% midfield, 25% back. I'm not so super fussed about what the split is there, but certainly maybe a quarter of his time forward, and split the rest in those other areas of the ground. I'm not going to touch too much on Taron Thomas, but obviously, if he is available for selection, he's a walk-up start in terms of playing forward line and midfield time. Similar to Sheasel, we need him where the ball is if he's playing. So hopefully before the season starts, we get some clarity on that situation. But until that point, I would just rather mostly not talk about him. So I think they're the only locks from those players that I've mentioned, to be honest. There's a couple here that are probably fringe locks that we'll talk about and that will definitely get games. So Eddie Ford, I think, is, for me, he's very close to cementing himself as a lock in this side. I did think it was interesting that he had to bide his time last year, and I don't think his VFL form was fantastic, but there are some people that had made the comment that he's the sort of player that plays better in an AFL system and can show his skills better there. And yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think that proved to be correct. He came in and was a very consistent performer. So I know there's some injury concerns around whether or not he's going to play round one, and possibly the fact that he's missing match simulation, and that match fitness might mean that he needs to play in the VFL for the first couple of weeks, just in terms of getting a fitness base up. But I have no doubt that he'll get an opportunity when he is 100% fit. Great lead-up option, can play that really high half-forward, first or second option coming out of the defence. I love seeing him mark it on the wing. I just want to see him take another step this year so that he can absolutely be, picked every week. And I think in order to do that, it's just improving on that impact slightly. I think he was really consistent. I'd just like him to be consistently slightly better. And all I mean by that is I'd love him to kick an extra goal or take an extra mark or really work on his ability to shut down an opposition defender. So we saw him play a role on James Sicily when we played the Hawks the second time, and he sort of was able to play that well at the start of the game, and then I thought Sicily kind of got on top of him later on in the game. So I think there will be times where he's asked to play that defensive forward role, but when he's not playing that role, I would love to see him just consistently making himself an option, because we know in order to get Larkey the best opportunities, Ford needs to be more than a decoy. He needs to be an actual decoy that could potentially be an option. So yeah, similar to, we've got so many types like him that are those kind of medium marking type forwards. So because we've got so many, he's going to need to stamp himself as able to hit the scoreboard, able to rack up enough disposals to be dangerous. Paul Curtis is another similar one to Eddie Ford. I think he's kind of perceived by certainly me at times as a small forward, but he is also medium size. I think he's around high 180s. So he's not short. He's just obviously he's smaller than, a key forward. Had some year 2 blues last year at times, but looked dangerous, and we know that quarter against West Coast when he kicked 4 goals, like he can be electric. So we need more from him in terms of his goal scoring consistency, and he just needs to work on his discipline. He gave away 27 free kicks last year and only earned 7, so he was a minus 20 on the free kick differential. And oftentimes that was just him not being super smart with the way that he used his body. There's certainly, like any player, he had a couple of ones that I thought were very unlucky. But when your tally is that disparate, you have to think that you're doing something wrong. It's not as if the umpires are going out there and saying, let's ping Paul Curtis every time he gets it. So I'd like to see him just work on his discipline and his technique, so he's giving away less holding and pushing in the back free kicks. But yeah, I think if he can do that, if he can kick a couple extra goals and he can bring that pressure when the ball hits the ground, then I think similar to Ford, he's close to cementing a spot, but he's just not quite there. And we saw that at times last year He was kind of in and out of the side in that middle part of the season. So, yeah, I'm expecting that third year we can see some real growth from Paul Curtis this year, and hopefully he can cement himself as a really dangerous option, because he does have that capacity to play deep, just like Larkey does. He can really win a one-on-one contest. So it's great that he does have that flexibility to play deep. Cal Coleman-Jones is a really interesting prospect. He's really our only option as a second key forward that can also back up in the ruck. So I definitely think he's going to get opportunities this year. I saw recently that he was finally back playing full contact and able to participate in full contact stuff. So hopefully his concussion issues are past him. That was a real issue in that second part of last year, and he has obviously been injury prone. He missed the start of last year due to injury, which really allowed Charlie Conman to cement himself before he, shattered his leg. So there's a lot to like potential-wise about CCJ. He really just needs to put it together. So inconsistent at times, really floated in and out of games when he was fit. I don't love him as a full-time ruck. I know some people would like to see him take over from Cherry as full-time ruck. I think he's quite clumsy in ruck contests and doesn't always use his strength for the best. He gives away a few free kicks in the ruck, or a few too many for my liking. And what I would love to see him playing forward is for him to be able to hit the scoreboard more. We know that he had that massive VFL game. I think it was 9 goals that got him back into the side last year. We don't need him kicking a bag like Larkey. He's not going to be a 60 or 70 goal a year forward, I don't think, ever. But we do need him probably kicking a goal and a half a game, end up with 30 to 35 for the year. That's kind of what we need out of a second tall forward. And obviously, we'd like him to just be able to be serviceable in the ruck. So, I think he's going to get opportunities this year. I really hope that with this non-contact time, he's spent a lot of time working on his decision-making and his leading patterns and that kind of thing, because we certainly don't need him leading to the same spots as Nick Larkey. We need those two leading to different parts of the ground. But I think this is his year. He'll get opportunity with Common going into defence. He's really the only one there. So we know if it's not going well, really it's him or bust for a second tall forward. So I do hope that he can bring it this year. Jaden Stevenson is an interesting one, where I think there's probably several people that have him falling out of the side, and I think part of that is just due to the fact that we've got so many of those medium forwards that you can't fit them all on the side, particularly medium forwards that can't really play anywhere else. I still think he's got a lot to offer at AFL level, but I think players like Dersma, who we'll talk about in a minute, are really going to be knocking on the door for his spot. So, he had a fantastic, I thought, really good first third of the year last year. And then when Clarko went away, I felt like we lost Steve-O too. He really wasn't his best. And I think he improved at the end of the year, but we didn't see that start of year Steve-O. So I think we know what we're going to get from him if he's at his best. It's not high possession football, but it's the sort of thing where if he's playing his best, he's going to kick 2 or 3 a game and maybe only touch it 8 or 10 times. But when he touches it, he does something with it. And I think we just need to see that consistently. Similar to CCJ's output, like I'd love Steve-O to kick 30 or 35 this year if he's able to play most games. But I do worry for his spot in the side. I think he's competing with players like I said, like Zane Dersma. I think Paul Curtis and Eddie Ford and Cam Zerha, although they, like a lot of those players that I've listed there, aren't similar player types, I do think, they're competing for really 7 or so forward spots. So, and when you think like Larkey's got one sewn up, let's be honest, and Zerha is going to have to be pretty out of form to lose his spot. Like there's not many spots left there. So, I think it's going to be interesting how we're all feeling about Steve-O come the end of the year, but I certainly still have high hopes. He's obviously got class. We know from his debut season that he can score goals and be dangerous in that forward 45 or 40 metres close to goal. So I expect to see some improvement in terms of our offensive game plan and how that could impact him, because him running towards goal with the ball sort of 70 metres out, I think can be a special thing. And then, Darcy Tucker is not someone who was on my radar prior to these most recent match sims. I think he's almost been the talk of the town in terms of how he's performed in those. I don't know what area of the ground I see him best in. I do not see him off half-back, but I could see him in midfield and wing and half-forward roles depending on other player availability. I don't know what to make of him. I think possibly there's a spot for him on the wing. Ultimately, we've got to have probably 3 or 4 players that can go through the wing at times. For whatever reason, it seems like Bailey Scott might be playing off half-back, so then there's going to be his wing potentially up for grabs at times this year. So, I didn't have him on my bingo card as someone that could be playing early footy, but if he's able to play some consistent footy, I'd love to see that from him. I didn't love his play in the back line last year. I think under pressure, deep in defence, he can kind of come unstuck, and I saw that a couple of times with some errant kicks and some bad one-on-one performances. So, potentially midfield or forward of the centre, we could potentially see some Darcy Tucker at times, but definitely if there's injuries, we know that he is a mature body and great depth. Similarly, Zane Dersma kicked 4 goals in the first match sim. So when you do that, you're going to put your hand up for selection. I think he kicked 2 in the next one, so we know he can find the goals. I think similar to Cam Zerha, he's probably better suited to being a third tall. He's not, he's not high 190s. And he also is going to need to bulk up over the next couple of years, but he's so flexible and he really could be anything. I think he's definitely going to get opportunities. There's obviously talk. He's made some comments in the media that he wants to debut, and good on him. I mean, we know that for Shees, that worked out really well for him, and he was going to be playing in a forward role probably before he smashed it in that practice match and ended up in defence. So, he'll get opportunities, Zane, and I can't wait to see what he can bring at AFL level. I just think we like with any young player, but particularly with taller young players, we just need to temper our expectations in terms of what he might bring in this first year, because he's 18 years old, so he's got to put some strength on, and that takes time. And the last one that I've got here in terms of ones that I think will definitely play at times if we're close to fit, Braden George, but it looks as though he might be getting some game time off half back. So I think it's probably unlikely we see him round 1, just given the fact that he's coming off that really 18-month batch of injuries with the knee, and then he did his elbow in the preseason. I think he's going to have to play some VFL football first. I think I'd be staggered if we played him round 1. Even if he's fit, I just think it'd be great to see him play some proper competitive professional football before he got into the AFL system. Off half-back, maybe playing a similar role to Shees last year, but I don't think he'll be a full-time backman. I think all the talk about him is his goal sense. So that's what we, I guess, can look forward to potentially in the future. He's another one of those small, medium forwards that we just have such a smorgasbord of. I think we'll definitely see him this year, but potentially in defence rather than the forward line. Then I get some stray thoughts here, I guess. So in terms of what I'd like to see or what I think we're going to see, Hugh Greenwood, who I saw the other day, rolled his ankle at training. Hopefully it's just a bit of a quick sprain, and he's fit for the practice matches coming up later in the month. I think he could play a role forward, and I know he's training in the forward line. He and Liam Shields, I think for sure, are going to play some games this year. 1 for depth, and 2 just for that real mature head. I know that because he came late to football, Greenwood doesn't have as many games experience as someone like Liam Shields, but he's got that age experience. He's been around professional sport for long enough. There's some people that really want to see him play that second ruck, whether that's CCJ playing primary and Greenwood playing secondary, or whatever it is. I'm okay with that, or with him taking some ruck contests as a stopgap. I just think we want to be careful around the fact that Greenwood's not our future. And sure, maybe he's still got 2 or 3 years left in him, but we're not going to be pushing for a premiership in that time. So if we've got injuries and Greenwood's what we've got as a second ruck, great. I think he'll do a serviceable job, but I would prefer not to have him there as our primary option, if that makes sense. I just think he should be more of a stopgap. He can play a role in the midfield if we're really short. He can play a sort of third tall, or even just a regular sort of medium forward role if we need to in the midfield. We know what he brings. He's a great tackler. He's not bad above his head. And he's great with contested footy. He can get a handball out or get a kick away under some pretty immense pressure. So we want to play to his strengths, and if that means that we sort of throw him to the wolves and get him to do some rucking like he did a couple of times last year, I'm here for it, but I just don't think he should be a primary option for that. I've mentioned a couple of times on previous podcasts, I really don't know where we go with Curtis Taylor. Maybe he can reinvent himself as a tagger, but I just don't think there's a forward line place for him anymore. Maybe it's a defensive forward role like Eddie Ford tried at times, but I think we just have too many small and medium forwards that have gone past him, so I don't expect to see him playing that role. Maybe he gets a chance off the wing, but I'm not certain about that. Jai Simpkin is one that, I think will play a little bit of forward line time, but I think there's so many people that are just saying, Jai Simpkin, essentially writing him off as one of our premium midfielders. I think we've got to remember he's our captain, and before last year, he'd won the previous 2 Sid Barkers. Like, the guy is a seriously good midfielder when fit, and he didn't have a fantastic year last year. He had a down year, but I would expect him to bounce back and still be one of our top 3 midfielders this year. So I think he can be dangerous resting forward. He knows where the goals are. He came into the side as a small forward all those years ago, but he's still in his prime, and I think he'll be mostly in that midfield. Zach Fisher is someone I would like to see us, at some point in the year experiment with in the forward line. He's certainly going to start in defence if he starts. He has done his hamstring, so we'll have to see how he goes coming back for practice games and whatnot. But yeah, I just think his skill set could be suited to the small forward line. We'll see. I think we've got so many halfback options that, if the halfback's going okay and there's other players that could fit that role, maybe we see if he could play a genuine small. I mean, he is a small player. He's 175 centimetres, which is smaller than me. I think I might be 176 or 177 for those playing along at home, if you're interested in my height. But that's small, that's a small forward size. A regular size mid sort of in the 180s, like mid to high 180s these days. So he's a good 10 centimetres shorter than them. So I think that's dangerous crumbing areas, and he could potentially play a role for us forward, but I'm certainly not expecting that to happen. Tom Powell, easy one for me. He needs to play midfield if he's playing. So, sure, he could rest in small bursts up forward, and we saw him kick a couple of goals last year, but that guy is a midfielder, and we saw it in that last game against the Gold Coast. We've seen it in the match sims. He is a midfielder, and his best football's played there, so I just don't think we can or should turn him into a forward line player at this point. Charlie Comben is an interesting one because I definitely think that he should get, an extended run in defence, but we know that, if CCJ is not going well or he's injured, or we really feel that we need a second tall, he's there as an option. Hopefully his body can hold up, but yeah, I mean, we know that he can play forward and at least take a grab. his goal kicking is a concern for me when he's forward, but we know he's there, so I think we shouldn't rule it out. And then these last four are sort of on that fringe. So Cooper Harvey, I think, is competing for a spot with Paul Curtis as those smaller marking forwards. I think he's probably a way off, Cooper Harvey. He did have a great match sim, kicked several goals, but I find it hard to slot him into the side just because of, again, we've got so many of those small, medium forwards that can mark the ball. So I think he's going to have to really bide his time in the VFL and kick a few bags, but I hope he can. Finbar, again, I've said it a couple of times, it's a great name. He's got real cult hero about him. I don't expect to see him get a chance early on, but again, like maybe he could play a supporting role to the main ruckman and spend some time forward. I don't know how mobile he is, and I know he's a bit raw, but he's there as an option. And then Drury and Hanson Jr., similar. Like, they're smaller players, they're relatively quick. I think Hanson Jr.'s probably got a bit more zip about him, acceleration, and potentially evasiveness. So he just needs to find the ball more if he's going to try and get an opportunity at AFL level. I think, both of them deserve some opportunities at some point, but I think they'll be fleeting. I don't think they're the sort of players that are going to come in and get, 8 games in a row if it's not going well for them. I think, they might get 2 or 3 to show something. So if the opportunity arises, but you'd suspect we'd have to be pretty out of form or pretty injury loaded for them to be getting games early on in the year. And that's everyone. So I've just got a couple of talking points to whip through before I wrap up this solo pod previewing the forward line. Some big picture questions, I guess. Which tools can play alongside Larkey in the forward line, and do we need another tool? I think back to that run that we made, that prelim runs that we made where we had Brown, Petrie, and Jared Waite. And, I think for the most part, the game has gone past, playing 3 tools. That being said, Jared Waite was a pretty mobile third tool, even in his time at North. Like, Ben Brown was never super mobile. He's always been that marking, really tall, not super mobile player. Petrie, I think by that point was, not super mobile. He was pretty key forward. Like, he was always pretty mobile for his height, but he wasn't, he wasn't Buddy Franklin. And who is? But I think the game has moved past having those really tall, dominated forward lines. Even then, it was a risky strategy to play that many tools. So I do think it would be great to have 2. So I think we need to find someone that can play alongside Larkey and not get in his way and be a legitimate, dangerous option so that oppositions can't sort of cheat and play 3 against Larkey. So whether that's Coleman Jones, like, I hope it can be, but the jury's certainly out at this point. There's a chance that we could have a go with Finbar Maley, as I said. You could argue that Hugh Greenwood's playing tall, but I think he falls more into that medium marking forward role. And similar to Zerha. So I'm of the belief that so long as we have someone in the side that can chop out the ruckman for, 10 to 20% of the game, I'm not sold on the fact that we have to have a second tool. Like an out-and-out tool, because we have so many of those mediums. It just means that you have to be aware of that mismatch. So what I mean by that is typically teams will have 2, sometimes 3 defenders that are designed to play on key forwards. So if we've only got Nick Larkey playing as a key forward and we're surrounding him with mediums and smalls like Zane Dersma, Jaden Stevenson, Paul Curtis, Cam Zerha, like players like that, you're probably going to have 1 or 2 of those players that are going to be outmatched in the air. But what that hopefully means is you're going to be better off when the ball hits the ground, or potentially faster so you can take the chest marks out in front. So it's just around knowing what kind of, how to move the ball inside 50 based on the forward line that's there. If Larkey's the only tall player, we absolutely can't be bombing it long. It's just not going to work because he's not a pack mark type of player. We know that Tristan Xerri has historically not been a great marker either, so even when he's going forward, let's say it's him resting forward and Nick Larkey's there and, I don't know, either Coleman Jones in the ruck or Hugh Greenwood's rucking. I can't see Xerri taking a pack mark either, like, Goldstein could do from time to time. So yeah, I don't think we need to play a second tall in the forward line, but I would like to if we can find someone who can do it well, and I'm hoping that's Coleman Jones. It looked like it potentially could have been Coleman, but we'll see how he goes in defence. In terms of the next question, who can be that small crumbing forward? So the options I've got written there are Harvey, Curtis, Drury, Hansen, Sheasel, Powell, Fisher, George. I mean, I'm not going to go over the ground that I've just spoken about, but I think Curtis can play as a small, even though he is in the mid-180s. I would love to think that one of Harvey, Drury, and Hansen Jr. could maybe become that small forward. But for me, that smoky right now is Fisher. And the player that I think genuinely could do that from round one this year, if he was played there, is Harry Sheasel. I think it's really easy to forget, that he was an elite small forward, and that's what we drafted him for, as that small medium forward that can play a bit of midfield time. So, yeah, I think Paul Curtis is the closest right now. I really hope one of those other players that I mentioned gets there, but I think Sheasel and maybe Fisher are the ones that could do it. And we just need players that are able to actually read the ball off a pack, because we do have a lot of players that prefer marking the ball, and that's part of why the ball marches out of our defence at times, because if we don't mark it, we're just not good at ground level. We're not good at reading the ball off the pack. We don't really have those players that can hit front and centre, grab the ball, and then burst out of congestion and kick it forward. That's what we need to find. Who can we rely on as pressure forward? So I guess this links back to what I was just talking about there. We need inside 50 tackle pressure to increase. I think, we were averaging less than 10 tackles inside 50 the last couple of years, and part of that is the ball just doesn't spend a lot of time in our forward line, but part of that is also because when it does come down there, unless we kick a goal, it just goes straight back out, historically speaking. So, I think Larkey we can give a pass, given he's kicking all of our goals. The other players like Zerha, like Paul Curtis, like Jaden Stevenson, need to be doing not just corralling and chasing. They need to be actually laying tackles and keeping the ball inside our forward 50s, so that we get more opportunities to use our elite midfield, or at least potentially elite midfield, and kick goals from stoppages in the forward line. So, yeah, I think in terms of who we can rely on, I would say no one at this point in the forward line is a reliable pressure forward. I think that's something that potentially Hugh Greenwood, if he's playing forward, could help bring. We know he's a great tackler, albeit I think most of his tackling is going to happen in contested situations, like just after a ball up or something like that. Like, he's not super fast, Greenwood, so he will find it difficult to get a chase down tackle. But in tight congestion, we know he can do it. That's where I'd love to see what someone like Fisher or Sheasel or the Hansen Jr., like these kind of more quick, evasive players, can they use that to be a bit of a chase down role? Could we, once a month or so see one of those players running a player down in defensive 50 and earning himself a holding the ball free kick? Well, that's what we need to find. We need to find more than just marking medium forwards. We need to find players that, can put the pressure on. I love the makeup of the GWS forward line. I just think they've got such a great mix of talls that can mark it and smalls that can put pressure on. And that's not just pressure in terms of tackling, but it's pressure in terms of you're worried about what they're going to do when the ball hits the ground. I don't think that opposition teams... Well, I know that opposition teams aren't scared of us when the ball hits the ground, because we don't do damage. It would be interesting to see some stats in terms of, how... if the ball goes inside 50 and it's a marking contest that's, split 50-50, what our conversion rate to a score from that point is compared to other sides. So it's a very specific stat, but I think that'd be an interesting thing to look at, because I can't imagine it'd be good reading or listening for North fans. And the final question that I've posed to myself in terms of something to look at for the year: which mids can genuinely go forward and cause damage when they're resting? So, I've talked about Hugh Greenwood. I think is someone that can play forward and midfield pretty interchangeably, but I'm hoping that he's not a mainstay in the side. I think we're hoping that Harry Sheezel's that player, but the jury's still out on that one, I think, at this stage. In terms of, Jai Simpkin, I think we think can probably do it at times. Maybe Darcy Tucker, but again, I'd say he's probably on the fringe of the side. We know that Taron Thomas can do it if he's playing. I don't think Tom Powell can do it, to be honest, but, I'd love to be proven wrong. I don't think Will Phillips can go forward and be dangerous. I think he's an out-and-out mid. So it's just around which of those players. Charlie Lazaro is the same. I don't know that he can go forward. In general, and I'll probably talk about it in the midfield preview, I think that's something that we need is just more consistent goals from the midfielders. So besides Zerha, who can definitely pinch hit in the midfield but's more a forward, it's potentially Harry Sheezel and it's potentially Taron Thomas if he's playing. Aside from that, I couldn't tell you someone who I think can do as good a job in the forward line as he could in the midfield. So for me, that's probably something to keep an eye on for the year. Does anyone sort of jump out as someone who can play both of those roles equally well? Because, it's great if you have a midfielder who you can plonk forward rather than taking to the bench and they can rest and be dangerous rather than rest and be a bit of a non-factor. So yeah, I think that's all of my thoughts for the podcast. I'd love to hear kind of what people are feeling and thinking about the forward line going into the year. In particular, just what your top 7 forwards are. I think it's fair to assume that we'll start with 6 and probably have a bench player or a midfielder or two that can swing forward. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, listeners, about who you think's definitely in the forward mix to start the year. I might put up a Spotify question rather than a poll where you can just, let me know what you're thinking, because I'd love to find out. I guess just all the usual stuff for me. Follow me on social media at NorthPodShow. Support the show on the Buy Me a Coffee link, and give the show a 5-star rating on Apple, and I will read out your review or your name if you're supporting the show on Buy Me a Coffee. Always happy to give a shout out. We'll just keep going with these weekly shows until the season is upon us. Obviously, I can do a midfield preview coming up next, and then I think by that time we'll probably have some match sim / practice match stuff to have a look at. So yeah, it's exciting times. We're nearly there. This is that part of the year where everyone thinks they're a chance. So we know this time last year it was feel good. We had Alistair Clarkson starting. We started with 2 wins and then it all fell apart. So hopefully we can stay upbeat for a bit longer this year. And if not, we'll have each other. I think, if we got through the last 3 or 4 years, we can get through another couple if we have to. I'd love not to, but let's keep it realistic. Have a great week, everyone, and I'll speak to you in a week or so. Go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of NorthPod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at NorthPodShow. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.